Welcome back to the Roll-Up High Roller community. As always, nothing on the roll-up is to be construed as financial advice. We are just some educators in the DeFi space. Toss us a quick like, give us a share, a repost, send it to a friend who may want to watch this, and finally, give us a sub or a follow. It means the world to help support credibly neutral educational content in DeFi. We're here to educate, empower, and enrich you, and let's jump in.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the roll-up. We did a really cool interoperability live stream a bit ago, and following up on that conversation today with regards to some of the topics of standards, interoperability for the modular future. Axelar has been one of the prominent kind of IBC and EVM connectivity layers over the years, and recently has pushed forward this idea of an Interchain Token Standard or service, ITS. So we'll be learning more about that from Jason, and also just some of your thoughts on the landscape of interoperability as we head into this kind of modular future. So definitely excited to learn more. Jason, coming live from the European landscape, and GM,
everyone. Thanks for having me today.
Yes, sir. Head of DeFi. Head of Degens at Axelar over here.
You're not supposed to tell everyone my secret title.
What is your PFP again?
It's actually a custom one from the Wrecked Wolves collection. I just felt like that collection resonated with me after I got wrecked last year. But that feels like a distant memory now. We're back in the vault.
Penguin, actually. When Penguin? Axelar Penguins for everybody.
Soon.
So Jason, what is head of DeFi? What does that entail?
Yeah, other than being a fancy title, I think it just means that, we work with all of the DeFi protocols and see what their cross-chain roadmap looks like and how Axelar can help to power some of that.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
One of which being Squid, right? Squid is like kind of like there's a very tight partnership. It's one of the leading projects that's utilizing Axelar in the back end. Like, could you talk about like how you guys have worked with Squid and helped them achieve this cross-chain roadmap that they set out to achieve?
Yeah, for sure. So, taking a step back, right? Like in our mind, we work with like two types of projects. We have existing projects that might, already be live for a while on a single chain, and they have, cross-chain functions or needs that they want to achieve, and we're here to help them. And then there's these category of what we call like natively interchain projects, such as Squid, where, right from the get-go, they were built to be like chain agnostic and, working on multiple chains using like a cross-chain technology like Axelar. So Squid was really one of the projects that came from the first batch of our grants program. And, I think they launched on mainnet just over a year ago now. And, they were looking to solve like the cross-chain swap situation, which is really giving users like any native asset across, different chains, and, delivering that in a way where you don't need liquidity. You can tap into existing liquidity at DEXs to give, users the most favorable rates. So Squid is, now probably one of the most well-known applications built on top of Axelar, but we have like, I think over 50 other cross-chain applications that has been building for, over a year now, that many of them are going live. Some of the other well-known projects are like, Prime Protocol or MintDAO, who's building like cross-chain lending and cross-chain NFT launch pads.
You mentioned these two groups, like the ones that kind of set out to build these interoperability solutions, and then the other group is these applications that have their home on one chain but are looking to tap into users and liquidity on multiple chains. And I think what we learned from this interoperability space that Andy mentioned at the top of the call is that these two groups converge at this higher level concept we call chain abstraction. So could you talk a little bit about chain abstraction? And I'd love to like attack it from two angles. One being the user experience angle, and like, what does chain abstraction look like from a user's perspective? And then from the other angle being like on the back end, how do we achieve something like that is able to seamlessly move liquidity across these different chains to achieve this like ideal end state for users.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's important to like talk about like the evolution of interoperability and cross-chain, right? And how did we get here? I mean, I think even if you fast forward like 2, 3 years ago, there was only a handful of blockchains, right? And back in those world, like every application only launched on one chain. You're either on Ethereum or you're on like Solana or Avalanche, and they were for the most part like completely disconnected worlds, right? And they had different communities, they had different like their own like liquidity. They were essentially like their own tribes. But what's happened in the last year or 2 years is that we now have so many more chains. We have a new chain being launched every single day, whether it's like an app chain, whether it's a roll up. But what's for sure true is that fragmentation of users and liquidity is more prevalent today than ever before. And this trend only seems to be accelerating as we see the proliferation of like roll up as a service or more standardized like app chain stacks, right? So now if you speak to a team, a developer launching a project, it's no longer, oh, I'm going to launch on this chain. It is certainly going to be, oh, I'm going to launch on chains X, Y, and Z, or I'm going to launch on chain X with plans to expand to chains Y and Z, very quickly. So the need for cross-chain infrastructure such as Axelar has never been greater, right? And in this kind of fragmented world, the need to be on multiple chains has never been greater because otherwise you are just so siloed from a big chunk of like liquidity and users. And that's really like where things are at. And from an Axelar standpoint, our mission has always been to provide coverage to all kinds of blockchains, EVMs and non-EVMs, and to provide a developer experience that's so seamless for builders that they don't really have to worry about a lot of the different blockchains. And to me, that's really what chain abstraction is, right? Enabling developers to be able to build like on any chain without worrying about like the nuances such as like the different consensus mechanism, what language it's written in. And chain abstraction from like an end user standpoint, I think kind of has always stayed the same. I think as an end user, you never really cared so much about what chain something was built on. Like if you wanted to do a swap or go from this asset to that asset, I don't think you ever really cared whether that DEX was built on Solana or Ethereum. You just wanted that asset, right? It was due to like a technical limitation that you ended up, caring so much about what blockchain it's on. But we, look towards the future with better interop technology like Axelar. As a user, you'll care less and less. You'll know less and less about like what chain it's being run on.
Yeah. And so that's kind of like this idea behind Axelar's ITS. So maybe we can like unpack that a bit. So we've kind of laid the landscape here with regards to the vision and kind of what this looks like for users in the future, for protocols, for builders. And so you guys then came up with this idea to have these kind of this thing happening behind the scenes where users have almost no idea that it's happening, but that they're using Axelar's ITS. So perhaps we can unpack kind of what ITS is and how this vision that you've just laid out is aligned with what you guys have built.
Yeah, absolutely, Andy. So, for us, we think there's like two primary like use cases when it comes to interoperability, right? You have like asset transfers, or what people call as like bridging, and you have what's known as message passing, the ability to like pass any payload commands across different chains. We think the future is going to be primarily like driven by, these applications using message passing, which they can abstract away a lot of the complexities today and build these one-click user experiences, right? And that ties in with what we just discussed about with like chain abstraction. But right now, what we're still noticing is that for majority of people, moving a token from one chain to another, like asset transfers, is a primary demand for cross-chain. So, we looked at this problem and said, like, what are some of the areas that we can really address and improve? And, to us, there's a few things, right? First of all, like bridging today is still like not the safest. There's still many centralized token bridges out there where like it's like a black box. Like you don't know what's happening in the back end. You just know you're getting some asset on the destination chain and maybe you paid a fee. So we definitely wanted to make it more decentralized, more transparent, and safer for users. The second thing is we wanted the process to be permissionless. Like today, if a lot of people might not know, is if a project wanted to bridge a token, they usually have to go reach out to some bridge provider or interop provider and say, hey, can you add my token to your bridge for me to bridge it, right? And a lot of times is for smaller projects, like they just don't even get access to be able to bridge their token because these teams are focusing their resource engineering work on like the larger tokens, which we think is just against the ethos of crypto, right? It needs to be decentralized, it needs to be permissionless, so everyone has access to these services. And lastly, we wanted to make it a code-free solution so that anyone can launch a token. We think like tokens are really like at the heart of crypto, right? It's the critical piece of so many things. And yet today, if you're not a software engineer, it's very hard to actually like launch a token. Like the amount of times I personally wanted to create a meme coin and play around with it, but it was just like it's always on my mind, right? And so having this like lower the barriers of entry and having like a no code solution, we thought would be really powerful. So the Interchain Token Service really combines like all of these elements, which we believe creates truly an innovative and transformative product, right? Both for like crypto native application and for many of the large enterprises that we're working with. What we're hearing like day to day now like is tokenization, right? Even BlackRock and Larry Fink is talking about it. But tokenization is very meaningless on a single chain in this broad like cross-chain context where we have hundreds if not thousands of chains. So the Interchain Token Service is really a code-free tokenization solution that lets anyone permissionless creates a token, but also has this bridging capability built in. It supports right now all of the EVM chains that Axelar supports, which is over like 15 chains. But very soon, later in the year, it will support non-EVM chains as well. So it gives everyone a solution that allows people to expand to really any chain down the line, given that Axelar's mission will be to connect all chains.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And so does anybody else have to adopt this token standard for it to work, or because it's all function, it's powered by Axelar with the Interchain Token Service, like wherever Axelar is, these tokens can be, right? Is that kind of how it works? Like I don't need to have chain A, B, and C and roll up C, D, and E all accept that this is a like standard, or this is a type of token that is functional on my chain. As long as Axelar is there and it's with its its bridging layer and its kind of interop layer, then my token can also be there. Is that true?
That's true. So as long as Axelar supports that chain, and
yeah.
I just want to note that Axelar today already supports the most number of chains, like 56 chains with EVMs and non-EVMs. But yeah, as long as Axelar supports the chain, you'll be able to use ITS. How I think about it is that there's really like three types of scenarios, right? You're either someone who currently has a token on one chain and wants to make this token available and able to be bridged to many chains. You can use ITS. You simply copy and paste the address into the portal. The ITS portal will find all the token information, and then you literally toggle which other chains you want to deploy the token on. And within minutes, Axelar will send a message to these destination chain, register that token for you, and now you can use the portal to bridge the tokens, one-to-one. You can also get the tokens whitelisted on Squid, so you have a ready-built front end, which also gives you distribution to all of the applications and wallets that's already added Squid to their product, which I think is a very cool feature. Then there's a second scenario, right, which is you don't have a token yet, and you can use an ITS to register that token on all of the chains at once, right? And one of the cool benefits of being able to deploy a token through ITS on all of the chains is that you're able to have the same token address across all of the chains because you're registering them at the same time. And that from like a user experience standpoint is like awesome, right? Like nobody really remembers token addresses even on a single chain. So if you have different addresses on like 15, 20 chains, it's just impossible. So I think having like the same address is like a really cool feature as part of ITS that I don't think a lot of people know about. And then lastly, you have the last scenario, which is rare, but it does happen, is that a project might already be on multiple chains and they've actually already natively minted that token on each of these chains. So then we can still enable interoperability and bridging for these natively minted tokens on different chains, but you wouldn't be able to use the portal. What you'd have to do is you have to use the ITS contract. We have a repo called, the token manager that essentially can link these two different tokens or more, so that you can still bridge them like one-to-one via a lock and unlock mechanism in the back end.
This permissionlessness nature of this is it's so meta. Like, it's so important because you mentioned the fragmentation. Like, there's going to be so many rollups and so many applications that it's, as head of DeFi, your entire business development department at Axelar is not going to know what to do with themselves. There's going to be so many rollups.
It's going to be a rollup coin on every Axelar chain, the rollup token. Stay tuned.
Yeah, we'll edit that out. But like the permissionlessness is so important because it allows this to scale like with ease, right? Whereas if there was gatekeepers, it'd be much more difficult. So I'm curious, like, how you see this landscape evolving. You also mentioned, like, on the other end of the spectrum, tokenization and BlackRock and like these players coming into the game. Like, it's not, I don't think it's too far out to expect that like we'll see BlackRock chain and JPMorgan chain, right? Those things are already in research and development. How do you anticipate interoperability happening? And like, what do you think interoperability looks like between, Bear chain and like, this crazy like meme rollup with like JPMorgan chain or BlackRock chain? How do you anticipate those, interacting with one another in the bridge landscape and in the liquidity landscape?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Ravi. So, just on double click on what you said in the beginning, right, is that the ITS right now is fully permissions to create a token, right, on these different chains. But to connect a new blockchain, this process is not permissioned and permissionless yet. So this is actually this other thing that Axelar has been working on for now over a year, is the Axelar virtual machine. So what Axelar virtual machine is now scheduled to be, launching end of this quarter, early in Q2. And this is essentially a smart contract layer on top of Axelar blockchain. I think some of the things we didn't mention is only Axelar is uniquely built as a proof of stake chain in the interop infrastructure space. And because of that, we're able to build on this programmable layer, right? And the implication of launching the Axelar VM is like twofold. The first thing is, as you mentioned, blockchain foundations themselves will be able to more permissionlessly like build out the gateway contract relay and connect to the network. And this is a game changer for the interop space, because today all of the engineering work is done by these, interop players, whether it's Axelar or Layer 0, Chainlink, CCIP, or Wormhole, and so on. But what that ultimately means is there's a capacity issue. Some teams might be able to add 4 or 5 chains a quarter, the other one might be at like 2 or 3. But that's also the reason why, if you look at the solution, everyone supports the same chains, the big popular ones, right? There's loads of these like medium, small size chains that are sitting there like little islands with no access to users, no access to liquidity. And that's just not scalable. To your point, the only way like we can connect all chains is through a fully permissionless self-serve type of way. And the way to do so is you need to have some kind of programmability and automation built in, right? And this is where Axelar is uniquely positioned to enable this, because only Axelar is built as a proof of stake chain. So we're really excited about that, because as you can imagine, now we have a way to scale to like thousands of blockchains in a permissionless way. And as a product underneath that, ITS will then allow anyone to be able to launch a token on any of these chains. And I think that's just going to be a real game changer for the crypto industry. But to the second part of your question, which I think flows into this very well, is it's no secret that many of these leading enterprises and banks are building their own private blockchains, right? Fully permissioned chains. And that's also only going to accelerate and continue. But they themselves acknowledge the need to tap into like public chains and public liquidity. So they're also thinking of interoperability like everyone else. The only difference here is that it's going to be a gated chain, right? So we're working very closely with the MasterCard team, who has been working on their own private chain called MTN. And MTM is last time I checked on testnet, I know they're scheduled to launch publicly on mainnet this year, but it will be a fully permissioned chain. So on MTN, they're issuing something known as like tokenized deposits, right? Which is essentially like tokenized like GBP, British pound or US dollar that directly has access to the banking rails, where you can withdraw these like tokenized deposits one-to-one with British pound or US dollar right in your bank account. So therefore, for anyone to access the chain, they must make sure that that party has passed all of the KYC AML regulation of UK US banks. And that's what they're going to do, right? How it's going to work is, if you want to use their network, access directly to the banking rails, then you need to be a fully KYC party that fulfills all of the regulatory requirements of a regular banking partner. So they're going to look at it address by address to see who gets to use it. But it doesn't really affect too much from the interop standpoint. You can think of Axelar as the highway connecting all of the chain. We're still going to have the highway connection. It's just that when you get to our private permission chain, whether you get to use it or not,
you're going to run into a toll. You're going to have to pull up to the toll booth. They're going to take a little bridge fee. They're going to ask for your name, your ID. You're going to have to give them your social security number to get into BlackRock chain. But that's not you guys. You guys permissionlessly connect all these chains. It's up to the blockchain is what you're saying to kind of mandate KYC on a case by case basis. Yeah, if you have a response to that.
No, you're exactly right.
I don't know what that ends up looking like. Like when I think it is pretty easy to picture, like just a simple transfer. If I want to take liquidity or some assets from, a public chain and I want to go to a permission chain, I can picture like a landing page that it gets my KYC information to, unless I've already done that and my address is already on the list. But to use like some DeFi applications, that kind of like, now that we're getting like a lot of these omni-chain liquidity, like liquidity lending markets, a lot of these like cross-chain swap markets, it'll be really, really interesting to see if there are applications that combine public and permissioned liquidity into one layer, like one application that you can tap into both. And not only just liquidity to do swaps between both, but like some of these more colorful, like, DeFi applications and primitives, like take one off the market, just anything like one of these Ethereum loans, these ethereal bonds that are popping up, or I think they're called Athena. Just any one of these like stablecoin yielding products. All of these are like kind of like a mishmash of different liquidity in the back end that is using, swap fees or something to generate yield. So I think it'll be really, really, fascinating to see like the convergence of public liquidity and permission liquidity. What do you guys think, just in general?
Yeah, I think it's gonna be really interesting to see how it plays out. I mean, my personal guess would be you already have these like players like such as Ondo or Mountain, these rolled asset issuers that's already like, fully licensed, fully regulated. So these are the type of like parties that I think will get access to these permission chains first, right? Because they already meet all the requirements. And if something goes wrong, they also know, like, whether it's MasterCard or JPMorgan, they know exactly who to like chase after. So they're not going to like, the counterparty risk there is like very minimal, right? With a lot of the more like DeFi experimental stuff, I think that's going to, come much slower. And frankly, I think it might be like a two-step process. You might like have like an application, DEX or whatever, that's all this crazy stuff is happening there. And then they might be transferred to, the liquidity gets transferred to a more regulated party, whether it's like Ondo or someone else. And then they can then go access these permission chains. It's probably going to be some kind of a funnel process in that respect.
It's just like, we've got the Bitcoin ETF, the Ethereum ETF feels like it's right around the corner, like this summer or something like that. Like, it's just like, it feels like these institutions just can't stay away. Like the genie's out of the bottle at this point. It's just a matter of time before they're leveraging up their Bitcoin or they're borrowing against it. And they're going to start to do that in the private markets and then slowly, ease their way into like the more public markets. Total speculation on my
Gonna be
part.
interesting to see.
Just putting it out there. But as head of DeFi,
Yeah.
I appreciate your opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been very bullish on crypto, right? I think like with this kind of true disruption, it'll take time, right? And it has taken a ton of time. But from the very beginning, nobody could deny the unique value proposition that crypto brings, right? There are efficiencies to be had. There are benefit, just true pure technological benefits in using blockchain technology, and I really do believe we're now past tipping point.
Yep. Speaking more about the here and now with ITS, we did a really fun space with some of the launch partners, and I'm curious about kind of how some of these launch partners plan to use ITS and some specific use cases for different types of applications. So we've got Frax. It is like obviously a really cool DeFi project and is launching their own L2 with their own token. Not really sure what the plans are there. XDeFi, Daki Swap, and a couple others. So I'd be interested to understand how each of these different types of projects, wallet, L2, DEX, and other types, are each in their own respective way using ITS.
Yeah, totally. So I'll go through each of them like one by one, but as I mentioned earlier, like a token is the heart of every project, right? And every token will have different use cases, different tokenomics, but being in crypto, like the ability to expand your token, make it cross chain, is just key, and you'll see through these different examples. So with Frax, as you mentioned, they're launching their own L2, Fraxtal. They do have their own like native bridge called Frax Ferry, but it can only bridge Frax assets. So when lots of these other projects that are launching on Fraxtal from an existing chain, whether it's like Curve or like Cheetah or some of these other names you might be familiar with, when they want to launch on Fraxtal, they want to bring their token with them, right? And then they need a solution to be able to bridge their token or make it cross-chain on Fraxtal. So as we talked about before, like with ITS, they don't have to use any tech work. They don't need to speak to Axelar even. They can just use the technology, deploy their token on Fraxtal in minutes. And that's going to be like a really cool thing. I think a lot of these existing projects expanding to Fraxtal will be leveraging ITS. And I think that will really set the precedent for how projects expand to new chains moving forward. With XDeFi, they're a wallet, but they want to be able to expand to additional chains to tap into new liquidity, new users. So, a project of their scale for them, it's a no-brainer. And ITS is just, again, like a really easy solution that supports the chain that they want. It's something that's very secure that they can trust. And working with Axelar is a no-brainer since we've been working with them on various other initiatives. Lastly, you have like DexiSwap, a DEX that's expanding to other chains. Their token is used as incentives to drive liquidity, grow liquidity for their pools. So they of course need their token on the new chains where they launch their DEX, and they just need a quick and dirty way of expanding there. And ITS was a perfect fit. So what I'm trying to say is, whether you need to go to a new chain because you need it for like liquidity incentives or cross-chain governance, or it's just simply tapping into like new users, ITS is the easiest, most permissionless solution out there. I'm so bullish that I think by the end of the year, probably a good chunk, if not the majority of tokens being launched, will be using ITS as a way to expand.
Yeah. And just to play devil's advocate, layer zeros, OFTs are very familiar. It is a key distinction. Is it fair to say that it's easier to launch ITS just from like a development perspective?
Yeah, I think factually, ITS is just much faster, right? Because with OFT, they still have quite a bit of contract work to do. And speaking of some teams that launch with OFT, it ranges from a few days work to even a few weeks to a few months of work, depending on the kind of contract changes they're looking at. Versus with ITS, we've had teams where they deployed a token on 15 chains literally in like under 30 minutes and created like a website, a front end using like Squid in under hours. So you can go from like deploying token, having like a ready to go bridging front end in hours. I just don't think it's possibly it's to get faster than that. And while we're comparing like to OFT, I think the other key part to this is that Axelar is fully decentralized and it uses proof of stake security, right? Versus Layer Zero's Oracle and Relayer setup has been well documented that it's more centralized. So there's very different security assumptions there as well. And with OFTs is that after you create the token, that's just one part of the journey. For most developers, you want to be able for people to actually have a front end to bridge it and use it. So the ITS portal itself acts as a front end where people can transfer the tokens back and forth, and anyone can access it as long as they have the link. But for a more user-friendly experience, they can actually get the tokens whitelisted on Squid Router. And because Squid itself is a building block for most teams, you probably have seen Squid yourself in many of like applications, dexes, and wallets. This just gives that instant distribution for these new tokens very quickly, right? And I think that's an incredibly valued part of the solution as well.
Yeah, I think the easier setup and just kind of like quicker deployment is pretty important overall. And then of course, like the focus on just kind of like security and decentralization is like the key primitive as to why we're even here. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of clear that up because that's kind of the first thing that came to my mind. Outside of that, like Connext has XCRC20, but that's quite different in terms of a setup, because basically, like I said earlier, just to further confirm, nobody else has to like agree that this is a standard or this is like a token that is valuable or that is legitimate on any of these 15 chains or more in the future. As long as Axelar is there, these tokens are there regardless, backed by the technology from Axelar, and that's kind of like that's it. Like they're like there doesn't have to be an acceptance of these standards across the board. As long as these chains accept Axelar, they accept ICS-based tokens, which I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. And something else I want to highlight is that, if someone is really like worried about something like vendor lock-in, we can transfer the ownership of the IT guys contracts to the teams, right? And when you have ownership of the contracts, you can even switch out the messaging layer if in the future, whatever reason, you're not happy with Axelar. This is really just meant to be a really easy tool for people to launch tokens cross-chain. So there is no vendor lock-in. Like you can use like, of course, Axelar is a default messaging layer, but if in the future you wanted to have more control of your contracts and transfer to someone else, that's completely up to you.
Yeah, and remind us from a semi-technical level, a vendor lock-in, that's pretty just as straightforward as it sounds.
Yeah, so a concern in the interoperability space is oftentimes people are worried that if they use one bridge or cross-chain provider, it'll be very hard or impossible to switch to another one. So philosophically with Axelar, we always wanted people to use Axelar because we believe we have the most decentralized and best tech, not like lock people in through like economic incentives or something like that. So that's really the spirit of how we like design this tool, right? And to give you an example of this concern is that recently when Lido was looking for a bridging solution to take like staked ETH, wrap staked ETH to the different L1s like BNB and so on, they explicitly looked for a multi-bridge solution that had no vendor lock-in. So Axelar actually worked with Wormhole to design a multi-bridge solution, which the Lido community ended up voting in. And this solution not only starts with Axelar and Wormhole as with two messaging solutions, but you can actually add in and switch out additional messaging layers as you want in the future. So we can go into the details of like what are the trade-offs of a solution like that, but that's just an example of this concern being brought up and how we worked to address it.
Yeah, I am curious, like what if you don't lock in, right? You're kind of like intentionally foregoing potential revenue by like continuing to have that partner. So like you're giving that up, right? But for the sake of decentralization and lower trust assumptions, like how do you tend to balance that trade-off and when you're kind of considering these bridge designs?
Yeah, so like I think there's a few things there, right? Like a lot of times now, like especially with XERC20, there's this proposal that you should be using like a multi-bridge solution, or like using multiple like messaging layers. And I just don't think that's a one size fits all for most people, because with that design, you're sending multiple messages, and basically afterwards you're comparing the results of those messages and saying, oh, is it the same? So what that means is the users pays more gas, like twice or however amount more the gas is, because you're sending multiple messages. And also you have to take on additional like liveness assumptions, right? Like if, for example, when Axelar and Wormhole are both sending a message, but for some reason the Wormhole message didn't arrive because the relayer went down, then you have to pause the entire project, right? Just to kind of go investigate and see what happens. So there are those additional like liveness concerns. I think, for Lido, it might work well because there's not a ton of messages being sent, and they're not as price sensitive. So I think this kind of multi-bridge design works, right? But for your average project, you don't need to, like, you don't want to be sending like multiple messages, creating very high gas costs for your users and taking on additional like operational challenges, right? Like just with a decentralized, proof of stake security with the permissions validators like SETA, like Axelar, that security is more than enough for most people, right? And people just want to work with something that's like secure, battle tested and turnkey. That's what we see in most of scenarios.
I think it's important we distinguish one thing that I think you're putting down here, which is that on a lot of these aggregator setups, it's like you're only picking one bridge, right? So when we think of a multi-party or a multi-bridge solution, a lot of times it's just one that you end up using, but you're just kind of looking at all of them. Whereas in this Lido example, Axelar and Wormhole are like almost like a 2 out of 2 type of thing. You have to have both of them relay the same message, and those two messages agree with one another and are consistent in order for the bridge transaction to happen. Is that how the Lido case works?
Exactly. Right. And in the future, we can add on a third or fourth provider as needed.
And security is paramount for that bridge design, whereas it maybe for other bridges, it's not. Very cool.
And then does that become a world where if there's like 2 of 3 or something, does it almost then function as like a multi-sig in a sense, in case something like one of the bridges goes down or there's some like key error with one of the partners? Does it then kind of like fall back into the others, or how kind of does that work?
I mean, you can design it and however you like, right? You can, of course, say, you can have 3 messages being sent, and as long as 2 of them are correct, that's fine. That's of course like a possible design. I think the industry is still very much figuring out like what is the best design. I think so far, if anyone's curious, you should go look at the Lido proposal that Axelar and Wormhole put forth. Is really like leading edge, and we address a lot of these different edge cases there. But I want to touch back on one of the things you mentioned, Robbie, which is I think we've gone to the point that when it comes to asset transfers and bridging, many people rely on aggregators, right? And I think the user experience is definitely better, but what people don't often think about is what is all of the risk behind the scenes, right? Because when you aggregate all the different bridges underneath, you're also aggregating all of their different risk. And as we talked about earlier in the show, not all bridges are made equal. Some are more centralized than others, and oftentimes that centralization is what's giving people the ability to offer better prices, better speed, because it's just like a black box in the end, right? We already seen this happen with multi-chain. Back in the day, they were the biggest bridging provider when it comes to asset transfers. Everyone was using them because it was cheap and it was fast. But for years we always said multi-chain is very centralized and dangerous, but people didn't care because as an end user, it's easy and tempting to just focus on speed and price. And I think with an aggregator approach, again, like that just creates that bias, and it misleads users in thinking that the security assumptions, everything is the same, and you're simply just getting the best price.
What a wild story that is. Multi-chain, that one had a bunch of twists and turns as it went down.
Yeah. But Jason, I think with the aggregators, it's about user choice. Like, it's not about what's better or more secure from a ethos perspective. I think it's the reason why they exist is because they give users a choice to choose.
I'm sure if you surveyed like out of 100 people, like what do they choose? I'm sure 99 of them will say, I just clicked on the one that literally said prefer because it's the cheapest or the fastest.
Yeah,
Like,
cheapest and fastest. Like I usually
the
just
average
see,
ape,
yeah, for sure.
the average ape is not like gonna go, do detailed due diligence on a highly technical subject on understanding, what are the trade-offs and what are the security assumptions of each bridge, and neither should they have to, right? It's really up to us as a developer of projects to kind of do that for the user, right? Like we can't expect it's like when you're buying a car, you don't expect that everything about like the trade of the car, right? You kind of expect that the brand or the dealer has already like done the due diligence for you. I think long story short, I'm sure there will be another multi-chain incident in the future. I think that we still have all kinds of centralized bridges with all kinds of security risk. And I do think, the bridge aggregation approach is not the best approach when it comes to like asset transfers because of this, because that is aggregating the risk, right? For example, with the squid design, it's a very different design, right? It's saying it's still allowing users to swap any asset to anything by tapping into DEX liquidity, which oftentimes actually give better rates than just bridges. But then they're using only Axelar as the cross-chain messaging layer because they've decided that Axelar is the most decentralized and secure. So I think when it comes to bridging, it is not just about price and speed. You want to be using the most secure and most decentralized solution. And it's up to these different applications to kind of do their homework and do that. Because otherwise, if you're just presenting to the end user, oh, here's the cheapest and here's the fastest, security will be the element that gets traded off.
Well said. Yeah, Jason, this was an absolute blast, man. I think interoperability is something that we continue to hear about, and it's because all these new rollups coming out, the problem of interoperability only continues to get harder and harder to solve. So it's very cool to see tons of players like Axelar and yourself tackle this with elegance in the solution. So thanks so much for talking interop with us, and yeah, man, thanks for coming on the rollup.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. This has been awesome.
Yeah, cheers, Jason.